ladies and gentlemen. As you can all see, pleased on behalf of IBASA and EPI to welcome you all to our webinar series. Our topic today is how to help your clients to become suppliers to large firms and to take part of the ECD programs. I'm pleased today to introduce our panelists, Lusapho Njenge, and he is the manager of the enterprise and supply development of Exxaro Resources, as well as Hleku Maluleke. He's the managing director at Flashing Lights Photography. What's amazing about these two panelists is that we have one member, Hleku, who will share his journey, and I'll have a conversation with him, throw some questions at him, and feel free to also have some questions, and I might use some of those questions to share how he was a beneficiary of the ESD program with Exxaro, and Lusapho is sharing as an organization what they look for and how it is so that we can help our clients such as Hleku to become ESD beneficiaries. Welcome, Lusapho. Welcome, Hleku.
Thank you. Thanks. It's great to be here. Thanks, Tobeka.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Tobeka.
Thank you. Thank you. And then I'm also here. I have Christoph, who's assisting me. He is the tech. We will be having our conversations. At some point, he'll take over and facilitate the conversation, as well as we have Lusapho and Mr. Tumelo as well. Christoph?
Great, thanks, Tobeka. So we will jump off with you, Lusapho. So you want to do the screen share from your side, and we'll ask you to jump into the topic. But before we do so, let's do a quick poll, just to ask everyone what portion of businesses that they know of that have been trying to get into ESD programs or trying to become suppliers have succeeded. So if you are on your cell phone, you may just have to tap to the right screen. Otherwise, it should pop up on your screen if you're on your computer. And you can vote there what portion of small businesses you know who tried to enter corporate supply chain have done so successfully. You know, so you may know none that are successfully, but they have tried, or you don't know of any that have tried. Those are the first two options. And then otherwise, it's a quarter, between a quarter and a half and 3/4, or more than 3/4. Just for us to get a sense of what the state of affairs are. Of course, most of us in the room are business advisors, and maybe we can just I'm just kind of going to glance here at some names, a lot of new names. Balja, welcome. I'm not sure if it's the first time that you join us. Then there's some familiar names, of course, too, you know, sort of Itna, you know, sort of just glancing through the names here, Jacques, Kotso. Guys, all of you are very welcome to this event. It is a CPD event. It is for continuous professional development of business advisors and practitioners in the field. And we hope that we can contribute something towards what you can add to your clients today in the webinar. So can I end the poll, Tobeka? I think I can. Enough time for voting? I think it is.
No. Give it a few. We're only at 64%. Just a few more people. Okay. Can you vote, please?
Come on, guys. And by the way, if you're joining us on Facebook, if we can just make sure that we understand that too, that in fact there are 15 people on Facebook now. We're just over 100. We're 107 people in the room here today. If you're following us on Facebook, we will be following the text chat there, the comments. So when we ask for comments, or if you want to ask a question and you're following us on Facebook, there it went up to 13. So I think that number is going to keep increasing because the people that weren't in time are going to watch through Facebook. If you want to refer someone else to join us too, you can send them to the IBASA Facebook page, and you'll be able to follow us there too. So on Facebook, we'll be following the text chat. So of the 14 people there, hi guys, I'm just typing there. You can participate there. Maybe you can introduce yourself there too. And we can also ask for the participants in the Zoom webinar. You can open the text chat button, and if you can just type in there what your involvement is to in the small business space, specifically how you relate to helping small businesses to find clients in the corporate field. So you can use the text chat for that. And then, as Tobeka said, if you have a question that we want to answer, put it in a Q&A, because then we will stop at that. And if we can't actually answer it live by word, by speaking word, we can try to actually answer it by typing in there too. And Lusapho, if you can also follow the Q&A, you can be typing away there while others speak too, please. That would be great to support others. So
wonderful. That looks good. And we also had 80% who have voted now. So I think we can stop.
Great. So let me share the results there. So we are less than a quarter is the biggest. It's about 55%. Wow, that's quite it's quite a high percentage. In fact, I was kind of anticipating the lower would score. So it's less than a quarter, it's about half. And then if you add up the others, it's 6 and 10, about 20% of us say that we know businesses that have had a quarter or more of them that have been successful. So it's not hugely successful, but there's some success rates. And of course, you know, sort of everyone is not suitable to become a supplier to large firms. So Lusapho, I assume you'll be covering some of that in what you'll be sharing with us. So if I may hand over to you. So by the way, Lusapho, I know from a lot of you were too, Lusapho, from your days at CEDA, long time at CEDA, including as acting CEO for a while, but looking at strategy and information and so on there before you joined Exxaro. And now, of course, you know, sort of continuing on the same vein there with the small businesses and helping access to small business in that supply chain and supporting them. So it's great to have you here today and looking forward to learn from you.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Christoph and Tobeka, and thank you for inviting me to this webinar. I think just to reflect first on the poll, I also pleasantly surprised how the numbers looking. I thought we'd probably have quite a lot of none, and I'm not aware. I think it's quite encouraging that there's about 55% at less than a quarter and quite a bit more between a quarter and a half. But I think hopefully if we have a webinar of this nature next year, we should see the red line probably be moving lower down, hopefully at more than 3/4. And I think one would say this webinar has been of some benefit to IBASA and its members. So my presentation is structured in the following ways. Firstly, I'll just touch just a quick recap on the ESD element of the BBBEE codes, what it says. And then from there, just to share an example of what a transformed supply chain looks like versus an untransformed supply chain, just to sort of giving an arbitrary example. And then from there, present a model of a good practice model of enterprise and supply development within a corporate field. And then also towards the end, then look at what are some of the tips and tricks you can use as a business advisor to maximize participation of your beneficiaries in ESD supply chains. And then also there's always a question around how capital intensive some of these supply chain opportunities are. What is an approach that one can consider to sort of bring your beneficiaries into corporate supply chains? So just to look at just to recap on the BBBEE codes. So I think a lot of people would be okay with this, but basically the target is that 80% of your recognized procurement spend should be going to empowering supply. So in empowering supply, there's a definition for that in terms of how it procures its goods and services, its employment practices, how it buys from small business and that. And once you tick certain boxes, you would qualify as an empowering supplier. So 80%, that's the target. 80% of a company's recognized procurement spend should be from empowering suppliers. Then that's further broken down into qualifying small enterprises, which is businesses whose turnover is between 10 and 50 million rands. And the target there is 15%. And a further 15% should go to exempt micro enterprises, which are businesses whose turnover is less than 10 million rands per annum. There's also a requirement in terms of Black ownership and Black women ownership. So I always make this example and I say, if you were to take the whole Johannesburg Stock Exchange and state-owned entities as a pool of businesses that should comply, and let's assume an utopian world where everybody is pro-transformation and everybody is trying to drive towards meeting these targets. So imagine 80% of the total measured procurement spend of the JSE. That's basically the market that is out there. You look at your state-owned entities as well. That's basically another market. I'm not counting businesses who are generic but not listed, which would be businesses whose turnover is less than 50 million rands, but are not listed on the stock exchange. So I think the acknowledgement is that the market from a BBBEE point of view is big enough. It is there. The question is the penetration is quite low. And I think that's where we need to have a conversation. How do we maximize penetration in that space? So from preferential procurement standpoint, there's these 5 levers that government has put in place to encourage participation of the businesses that I would assume IBASA members interact with on a day-to-day basis. So from a procurement standpoint, the targets are there. There's quite a lot of legislation. And I think everybody would agree that the market opportunities are quite huge if you look at it from that angle. We then understand that these businesses would not have the requisite skills, capital, and all of that to execute on these contracts. So the BBBEE codes further say, from a supplier development standpoint, you need to take your net profit after tax and invest 2% of that to your suppliers that are empowering suppliers, or QSEs and EMEs, and a further 1% to businesses that are outside your supply chain, which you're hoping to graduate into a supply chain or are of strategic importance to your business, but are not in your supply chain. So again, make another example, 3% of the JSE's net profit after tax, that's probably running into billions. So in terms of enterprise funding, that's the funding that's available. One just needs to do a bit of research in terms of where there's opportunities, which companies can I link my beneficiaries to, and start having those conversations. So I think from a legislation point of view, whether you look at this from supply development, enterprise development, or professional procurement, the opportunities are there. Legislation has sort of given us a good enough lever to work in that space. Is how do we get our businesses to operate and benefit from these opportunities? So typically what you will find is basically the following types of scenarios. So what you have on your left is an example of a company whose procurement spend is not diversified or transformed. And what you find on your right is what everybody should transpire, should sort of work towards. So let's take an example of a hospital, for example, as an example to use in the space. So typically you'd have medical supplies, lab services, laundry services, security, and all of that. So you'd find that maybe your lab services and your more technical stuff is what you find in your top left bracket, largely given, it's large contracts, largely given to untransformed or majority white-owned businesses from a BBBEE standpoint. And then your contracts like catering, security, cleaning is what you'd find on your bottom right. So that's an example of an untransformed organization. So the company then, once the verification has been done, they wouldn't come up with a favorable BEE rating, and it will give you a sense of where your pain points are. So a company then, you can't change the past, but you have to use the past to inform you and improve going forward. So some of the ways you can do is to say, okay, I understand lab services is a very technical field. How then do we use our ED spend to identify small businesses in the lab services and develop those guys, get the big guy to subcontract some work to them, develop them to a point where in 3 to 5 years, they can then become the main contractor, which is what we then find on this side, on the right-hand side on your top right quadrant. So you gradually move some of those opportunities to empowered businesses and sort of change how your procurement spend landscape looks like. You might still have a couple of untransformed businesses who've got the sole rights for a certain technology that you have to use. So there you might be sort of bound to use those companies. So that's why you might still have a couple of the bubbles sitting in this space. But there's no reason why over time you can't identify an area. So if you do an analysis of your procurement spend, you'll pick up the areas that are untransformed. You'll get a sense of when are these contracts coming up for renewal, and let me start developing businesses to be ready to take up those opportunities, whether it's to take up the whole opportunity or gradually over time transform that supply chain line item. So that's one of the tricks that you can utilize. But the important thing is for you as a business advisor, if your beneficiary wants to access company X's supply chain, you need to be able to analyze and say, how diversified is the company you want to supply in terms of the product and service that you offer. So if you're offering lab or technical services, to a hospital, for example, who are they currently procuring from? What other opportunities are there? What are their technical requirements? How can I prepare you so that in 2 to 3 years' time, when those opportunities, you can then also be ready to take part in those opportunities? In the short term, what programs can I put you into, so at least I prepare you to be ready for that opportunity? So that's how you diversify supply chain, is looking at the past, doing an introspection in terms of which areas am I not transforming in, and how do I develop businesses to be able to take up those opportunities, and over time transform my supplier or my procurement landscape. Then moving on to what one would call a ESD program delivery, a model, like a good practice model. And this is the one that we're implementing at Exxaro. So it's quite clear that at the top, you need to be clear who your beneficiaries are, which would be your Black-owned, Black women-owned, and Black youth-owned businesses whose annual turnover is 50 million rands and less. So you need to be clear on who your beneficiaries are from a program point of view. You need to have clearly defined delivery channels. It could be physical access points, which should be a business hub or an incubation hub, or you could use technology to automate some of your processes. And then how you deliver your products and services to your beneficiaries could be twofold. Brownfields is where you sort of link in with other processes in the business. Supply chain already has processes in place. So how do you align your processes as ESD to what supply chain is doing? But you might also need to develop new processes from an ESD program standpoint. Then from a solutions point of view, which is what you find at the bottom, there's generally 3 levers that companies use to effect and implement effective enterprise and supply development. The first one starts with supply chain, or your supply chain transformation. So your supply chain policies need to be enabling. They need to enable the participation of new entrants, especially your BBBEE, I mean your QSEs and EMEs. And how supply chain does this is there's certain levers at their disposal. They can agree on bid evaluation criteria that favor QSEs and EMEs. You put this up front when you go out on tender, that we're going to evaluate this tender based on the following principles, which will favor your QSEs and EMEs. You can do preferential contracting where you say we're going to give preference to the following demographics, whether it's women, youth, or Black-owned businesses. You're allowed to do that. You can do that. You can set aside certain opportunities, whether it's for, you want to transform a certain supply chain, a certain spend item, and you set it aside and say, going forward, we'll only give opportunities in this area to businesses of the following nature. All of this is being done to benefit those beneficiaries and transform your supply chain. There's also subcontracting, where when you give a large contract to a company, you can say, we'll give you this contract, let's say to do laundry services for 5 of our hospitals, but one of these you have to subcontract to an emerging laundry services provider and develop that person to a point where they can compete, they could compete competitively over time. So you could put in a subcontracting clause in large contracts where you say to the main contractor, you have to subcontract some of the work to some of these QSEs and EMEs and develop capacity in that space. You can also put in what they call BBBEE premiums from a price point of view, where you say, I understand that there's businesses that have been in this space for 20 years. They've got good asset base. They don't have to pay off. The assets are all paid up. So from a costing point of view, they would always come out cheaper than someone who's trying to crack into the market. So I can give a premium of 10%, where if an untransformed established business costs me 100 million rands, and a new entrant who's a QSE or an EME quotes me at 110 million rands, I will score these businesses the same in terms of price, because I understand that one business is disadvantaged in terms of capital equipment and know-how. So supply chain has got a lot of solutions at their disposal that they can bring on board. So someone comes in based on these solutions. Now you've got a contract. Typically, you wouldn't have a good balance sheet. You don't have a good credit history. So you're going to battle to really get assets to execute on this contract. That's where then the ESD programs need to come in and provide financial support, whether it's grants, it's interest-free loans, interest-bearing loans, or they can put you on early payment terms to ease your cash flow. So that then becomes your financial support solutions. And then in the middle, which is, in my view, the most important solution, is the non-financial support. I can create supply chain legislation that gives preference to Black-owned, Black women-owned, and Black youth-owned businesses. I can give you financing terms, put you on early payment terms, give you grants and loans. But if I don't develop the business and the business owner, there's a risk that the business might fail. You're not going to execute on the contract. It's got an impact on my company's bottom line. So it's in everybody's interest to ensure that once you bring in a QSC or an EME into your supply chain, let's provide as much support to this business to ensure that they survive. That's where you do a gap assessment, you assist in training and development. In the technical field, you can bring in retired engineers to handhold this guy for the first 6 months of his contract. So he's able to comply with the safety requirements, he's able to invoice, he's able to ramp up production to a point where he's able to get to the required targets. So that's, in my view, the most important part is your non-financial support. And that one is where I think the corporate and the service and the business advisor need to work hand in hand, where the business advisor says, okay, I've landed company X into your supply chain. Here are some of his challenges as a business. So the business owner needs a bit of technical or business mentorship. The business needs a bit of profiling, financial systems, human resource systems. So part of the funding should be targeting at improving the business operations. So that's a model that, in our view, if you really implement ESD in this way, you will transform your supply chain, but more importantly, create sustainable and scalable businesses that become an integral part of your supply chain and your business. And then the question will be, so this all looks good and well, but how do I bring in our beneficiaries into your corporate supply chain? Again, this is not an overnight thing. It's something that you need to work on a continuous basis. And these are some of the tips, or some of the tips I'd bring on board and say, you should consider some of these when you're trying to bring your beneficiaries or the guys you're supporting into corporate supply chains. I think the most important thing, you need to research on the corporate. You need to understand how transformed is a corporate supply chain, how diversified are they? Where are the opportunities for the type of work that my small business client is doing? How do I bring this in? You need to understand the corporate ethos. I mean, are they doing ESD for transformative reasons, or is it purely based on compliance? If it's based on compliance, how you approach them should be with more of a compliance angle. If it's transformation, have a more transformative approach in how you approach them. But try and match what you bring to the table to what the company ethos is. In an ideal world, we all want corporates to do ESD for transformative reasons. But the reality is, some of them do it for compliance purposes. And I think once people get the compliance part right and they see the value in enterprise and supply development, then the needle shifts towards being more transformative. So you need to understand that it's a journey also for corporates to move from compliance to transformation. They don't just wake up and implement this with a transformative ethos. Also, you need to build relations based on that shared value. So it's not really about introduce a company, they get a contract and you move back. You need to really maintain and nurture this relationship. Try and embed your beneficiary into that corporate supply chain so that they can get increasing business over time. Really think long term. It's not about getting a guy one contract. How do I understand where this corporate is going in terms of their strategies and align the small business I'm assisting with that company's future trajectory? But also, let's demonstrate success when we introduce our small enterprises to corporates. Demonstrate that you've walked the walk, you've taken a few guys, you've brought them in, and these guys are doing work in some of the large corporates. I think success breeds success. Once someone can see that you have been able to successfully support businesses and bring them into supply chain, they then warm up and see that let's start partnering with this business advisor and use him or her as an asset to transform our corporate supply chain. And then the last slide is just around some of the challenges that people have said. We bring our clients into corporate supply chains. A guy gets a contract and sometimes falls flat because the contract is sometimes too large for him to execute. So in industries like mining, for example, or construction, I think one needs to consider this tiered step-up approach where the first thing is try and get subcontracting arrangements for your SMEs that you're supporting. So subcontracting is where you say to a corporate, what are some of your large contracts that you issued out or you've issued out? Are there any subcontracting requirements in those? Please link me up with your main contractor so I can negotiate subcontracting opportunities for my small business. So subcontracting works because one, it's lower entry requirements. He gets a portion of the he or she gets a portion of the main contract that they can afford to service. They're also able to learn from the main contractor, because if the subcontractor fails, the main contractor fails as well. So the main contractor will make sure that the subcontractor never fails. It's proof from insulated from failure, because the main contractor can afford to have the subcontractor fail. And during that subcontracting process, you are building your business profile as a small business. Then once you've gained experience through subcontracting, you then identify similar businesses that are doing the same work as you and say, guys, there's an opportunity at company X. You've got so many assets, I've got so many assets. Let's all pool resources and jointly bid for that work. So you move from subcontracting to now joint venturing, where you could benefit from whether you're black owned, if there's a youth set aside opportunity, you joint venture as youth owned businesses, and you basically become a 100% youth joint venture. You benefit from that, and you use the experience you've gained from subcontracting to now work through a joint venturing. You learn experience there again, and then you take that now that you've done 2 years in subcontracting, you've gone through a joint venturing thing, through a joint venturing agreement, you should now be ready to then bid on your own independently. So then you should have built a sizable asset base. You've got trading history, you've got relations with your bank, with some of the OEMs that supply you with the equipment, because you at least got a 5-year trading history. You use that to then build and start bidding on your own. So it's very difficult for you to go in from a startup and say, I want to bid for 100 million rand contract. It's great to dream that way, but the reality is you're probably setting up yourself for failure because of the requirements, capital, but also just some of the targets and production requirements required at that level. So it makes sense to move in at subcontracting level and start building your business through to joint venturing, and ultimately to look at where you can bid for contracts over time. So that's where I think I will end my presentation. And hopefully Hleku will align to some of the work or some of the thinking I have around how you access corporate supply chains. Thank you.
Lusapho, I think we must organize a course on how to prepare your businesses for ESD programs, and we can have you as the star presenter there. This is a topic we can't do full justice with in a quick webinar, but I think it's a great introduction that you've given us, and there are some questions, we saw some comments coming through. Siva and Kortso, for instance, spoke about the difference between state-owned enterprises and other corporates, and whether the pitch is a bit different there and your preparation is a bit different there, and so on. So these are things for us to explore. So by the way, if you have a question and you're on the Zoom, you can just click the Q&A button and put the question there. We'll see how much we can actually answer live. Otherwise, we can ask Lusapho if he'll be kindly looking at the Q&A and even typing away while the rest of the webinar proceeds. That's maybe the most effective way of addressing that. And if you're on Facebook, Truman, Pinda that we had in our previous webinar, you guys that are there, Katu, who is from JMT's firm, you guys can put your questions there in the text chat, in the commenting of the Facebook too, and we can address them in that way. So Lusapho, I've got a question for you, which I also want to pose to the group. So you are experiencing, I'm just doing screen share as well, and I'm not so great at multitasking, but I hope that comes up now.
And I'll just put it in the chat as well. So
let's first ask the question to the attendees, everyone in the room, and those that are on Facebook too. You can type in the comments sections there your answer. What have been the biggest stumbling blocks you experienced in helping small businesses to get ready to be suppliers to large firms? Or you can extend that into getting into ESD programs too. But the stumbling blocks, what are the stumbling blocks? And we'll be looking here on the text chat what people are typing, as well as in the Facebook comments. So please give your comments there. What have you been seeing are the biggest stumbling blocks that are preventing smaller firms from becoming suppliers for bigger firms or from entering ESD programs? And then, Lusapho, I'll kind of straight shoot this question to you to quickly just address us before we move on to Hleku, you know, sort of. So we know that you moved from actually supporting businesses through CEDA to within a certain context of support to actually working on programs where you bring them into the corporate supply chain, you know, sort of. So what did you find in that move, you know, sort of that you was surprising for you, that things that people keep getting wrong, but that are easy to fix?
I think my first experience was, I think, how there's a disconnect between organizations that help small businesses and corporates. I think we talk at each other, we don't really talk to each other. So I think that's one thing I picked up, was there's actually willingness from both sides to collaborate, but I think it's how the conversation is structured. So I think at a high level is how the two organizations talk at each other, but don't talk to each other. The second one is, I think, how from people that develop small enterprise, and like, for example, CEDA, for example, is how we don't really take time and do research on the corporates and what opportunities are there, and really understand the corporate. What is your procurement runway? What is the next 3 to 5 years looking like for your business? Are you expanding? Are you opening new branches? Are you diversifying your business? Understand your strategy, where you're going, where the future opportunities. So I can start preparing my small enterprises for those opportunities. It's more like we react to what are you doing now? It might be too late now because there's already someone who's already in that space. But how do we start thinking long term? I think enterprise and supply development is a journey. It's not like a stop-start thing. So start thinking now that I want to place this guy in company X in a year's time. But let me understand what it's going to take for me to get this guy ready and guarantee that he will participate in that company going forward. So I think it becomes, there's a lot of short-termism in how we approach enterprise development.
Yeah, indeed. So I see there's some comments coming through too that we can attend to just now when we get to the Q&A. But Rebecca, shall I pass over to you too? So Hleku is a good example of someone that's gone through that process.
Yes, welcome Hleku. As you all can see, he is the owner of Flashing Lights Photography, and he has quite an interesting story. And I think my first question, and I hope you can answer that very quickly, as much as it's a big question, is briefly, could you please share with us where you started and where you are now, and how was that journey? If you can do that in a minute and a half or so.
In a minute and a half. Yeah, it's a tough one to summarize in a minute and a half, but thank you for the platform. I'm really grateful. I started, I picked up my first camera in 2001. I was in grade 10, I think, yeah. From a friend, Jabu, a friend of mine from high school. He had this point and shoot camera, and he was underutilizing it. And I pretty much took it from him and put it to good use. To use the language of politics, I expropriated it without much compensation. So from there, I started shooting, and people started paying for the photos. This were the last few years of film. So I would go to the next town in Toando and develop the photos, and I started making quite a bit of income from that, on top of the income I was making from my sweet selling business that everyone did in high school. Then fast forward, like all the good children from Limpopo, we did very well in our maths and science, and I ended up in university doing mechanical engineering. My parents were very proud of me, and I even went on to work and practice in the mining space and steel production space, until again I bought a camera for my wife, who wanted to do some YouTube channel, but she again, like Jabu in high school, underutilized it, and I picked it up. I started shooting again some weddings and parties, and people again felt like they needed to pay for those services. And then some years after that, some 2 years after that, I bumped into an old friend that introduced me to a corporate client, a hospital group, and they had an end of year function. And from that end of year function, I started thinking differently about my clients. I was introduced to the world of corporate clients, and for just those 2 hours, we covered the end of year function. They gave us 10,000 rand, and it changed my whole thinking about this hobby that I would soon turn it into a business. So, and then from there, I took a big leap of faith, and I opened a studio at a mall in Johannesburg, and we were just doing family photos, that sort of thing, portraits, and people would come in and make inquiries, and then come on the weekend and do their family photos. But those 2 years we spent there, proved that I was very ill prepared for business. I lost a lot of money. Things didn't work out as I had anticipated. That hospital group didn't call us again until their following year-end function. We thought they would call us every now and then throughout that year. But they, to this day, they still only call us for their end-of-year function. So it forced me to take a step back and remove myself from the operations, from operating the camera, and then I started looking for talent to do the editing and the shooting, and I started developing myself as a manager and a business development guy. And then that exposed me to, or it freed me up to go around meeting people. And eventually, one day, I met a gentleman that introduced us to the work that Exxaro does at ESD. And within weeks, we were standing in front of the committee, and I made a case there about how we were struggling with rental costs because we had built a team by this time, but we had no assets, we had no equipment. And so we were spending quite a lot there, and there was a lot of inconvenience that came with the lack of assets. Then Exxaro came to our rescue, and they assisted us with a huge grant to acquire cameras, and our work improved in terms of quality. And we also started doing our own work because we had these assets. Now we could put them to good use, and we also saved a lot of money from the rental costs. We were losing about 30% of our income to rentals. And
sorry, Hleku. So what's interesting here is that as much as you were involved, you realized you couldn't scale up or even develop as a business because you were too operationally involved. Going back to what Lusapho said earlier on, being able to think ahead and look at the big picture of, you know, possible clients that you can service, where the direction they're going, and you need to figure out the direction you want to go. But by the time you went to ESD, you had something to say, okay, I need to change, right? And I know as a practitioner and mentoring small businesses and working with them, you also have to sometimes help them along that journey to help them think strategically. So when you got involved, at what did you have someone you worked with that helped you look at where you're at now? So what are you doing now that helped? Had you not been in contact with Exxaro, would you have been able to be where you're at now? And what did they do to help you with that?
Okay, so that relationship we started with Exxaro, is very fortunate to have come into contact with them. But from that point, we started thinking more about sustainability of the business, and they helped us a lot in that regard. So building a support structure around us, We meet with a couple of their executives. They mentor us, and even some of the managers there, and give us guidance, and they help us to also open up other markets for us within their business units and also outside their business. So they've been quite helpful financially and also non-financial means.
Okay. Awesome, great. Thank you, Hleku, for that. I don't know if there's any questions on Christoph on Q&A, but I've seen one that, let me just see what Christoph has picked up in Q&A and see if there's something we can share there.
Yeah, so we can reflect on some of the comments that came through, and some people pointed had some pointed questions on the Q&A. So maybe we can open it up a bit, sort of Lusapho, if you want to come into, and Hleku. Hleku, I've got one last quick question for you. Sort of what was the biggest change that you had to make to become attractive? Like if you're a youngster and you go out to the disco or to the party or to the dance, you put up, you wear the right shirt, or you put up the right makeup, so that whoever you're targeting at that dance will notice you. Sort of what did you have to do? What makeup did you have to put on so that Exxaro could find you attractive?
So I made 4 points in that regard. For us, it was the makeup of compliance and the makeup of having a track record, trading history, and the makeup of systems, and as well as the support structure, which I alluded to. Compliance, if I can tell a short story there, before we were awarded the first grant that we got from Exxaro, our tax certificate had expired, and we couldn't afford to pay the accountant to sort it out for us. And so that simple compliance issue almost stood in the way for us from getting that financial assistance. And it was a source of stress for us, even to the point where we went around asking people for money so that we could sort out this issue. Systems, with my engineering background, I learned a lot of systems in that space, and systems make any operation to be predictable and to be ready for anyone to plug in, whether they've worked there for a year or not. And it also helps the clients that you work with to work much better with you. So we implemented systems like, for instance, in our space, we have gallery management systems, where when we've done a shoot, we upload on some, instead of just sending you a link from Google Drive, which is not kitted for the kind of work that we do, we use something, for instance, called PixieSet, which is a gallery management system. The client can share, download, and like their images from there, and even request for prints and so forth. I could talk for days on systems alone because I'm from that background of systems. But the track record as well, it helped us a lot that we had been trading for some time. We had some numbers to show, some financials, and some story in terms of our trading history. So that helped us to look a little attractive instead of just being a startup and going there immediately.
Great.
Yeah.
So Lusapho, thanks. You've been typing away a bit there, but which of those questions have caught your eye that you would like to comment on? Hleku, by the way, sort of, I think you gave some really pointed things there for whoever is a business advisor on this call. If they can, those points, if they can do things like help their clients to be a bit more presentable, working on the long term, getting a bit more organized in terms of their systems, that it will go a long way towards being attractive to be entering an ESD program. But maybe we can ask. We are pressed for time, so
yeah.
Let's hear from Lusapho. What caught your eye, Lusapho?
Okay, I think maybe just before I get on that, just to show how I think corporates also need to look at ESD as a journey, a relationship with the beneficiary. I mean, just to look at Hleku's story. So Hleku's business was hard hit by the COVID lockdown. He needs events to make money. So without events, there's no business for him. So he came through to us and explained his situation to say, look, I've got a couple of contracts in place, but until the lockdown regulations permit for me to operate, I'm quite restricted in how I'm able to generate revenue. I've got stuff that I've built and trained that I want to retain. So you should be able to respond to the challenge. So being able to advance further funding just to secure him until we estimate that by early next year, things should have opened up. He'll be able to work on some of these contracts and get his business up to full capacity. So you give him an interest, you give him a loan, and you give him a payment holiday until you anticipate when his business will scale up to normal operations. So it's really about building a relationship, because it's in our interest to see him succeed to become a scaled up and successful business. So it's not really once-off support. It's really responding to situations that the business finds in, as long as his business is on an upward trajectory. From the questions, I think there was a question from Asad Patel, which I think a lot of people would probably have asked as well, is how do you get a sense of how companies are spending and transforming? One example, I know EmpowerDex does an annual state of BEE where they rate companies in terms of how transformed, how compliant you are. So they would look at who's the most transformed company from ownership, management, ESD, skills development, and socioeconomic development. And I think if you get a copy of that report, you can start circling the companies that are not doing too well in terms of enterprise and supply development. Those are the companies that should be having opportunities for you to bring your clients.
Would you mind repeating that, Lusapho? I think that's a kind of a profound,
chat. Yeah.
Profound
Can
observation.
Put in the chat? Yeah.
No, there's been lots of questions about that, sort of, because you mentioned that if you can identify where the strategic challenges are that corporates have, that you can, and some people that are business have said, how do I know that corporate needs in that transformation area that they need assistance? So maybe that's one of the big insights that we can share here for business advisors today, because we can take it back to our clients and say, let's go do some research.
Yeah, and I mean, it classifies by sector. So if you're in construction, you can look at who's the most transformed, who's the least transformed, where the opportunity, where the challenge, which companies are more challenged in terms of enterprise and supply development, and approach those. I think those are quick wins. But then also,
we can find on the internet. We can. It's on the website.
Yeah, it's just that I'll do a quick Google after this, and then I'll share the details of that. They do an annual basis where they rank how transformed companies are. Yeah.
Did you say EmpowerDex?
EmpowerDex does it on an annual basis, yeah.
Okay.
Great. So, Tomeka, there's a question you want to focus on, or are we going to move on to our next segment?
I think we should.
There was quite a few observations here, including Ricardo Damas from Port Elizabeth, the IBASA chair there, has got a long comment about the engaging with corporates and that is a minefield to navigate. So it is something that we learn about too. The pains that we also, the readiness that we need to create. So thanks for that comment, Ricardo. I think what is alluded to is that we as business advisors also have a role. It's not only our clients that needs to become sexy for the corporates. It's if we can become the trusted partner of the corporates in bringing them the right clients. I don't want to put words in your mouth, Ricardo, but that's what I understand you saying there in the Facebook comment. If we can improve the way that we present ourselves to the corporates as business advisors, as professionals, then we are more likely to be able to help our clients to get access to the ESD programs and become suppliers to those corporates.
Everyone in the chat just wants to find out the name of the organization, and a couple of people have shared it in the chat. It's EmpowerDex. So just scroll up. I've just copied and pasted as well what someone has sent in case.
Thanks, Asad has done the research quickly.
Asad has said yes. So Asad has just sent a copy of that, and then someone had shared that the Business Day also also does the survey. It's published in the Business Day. Thank you, Amal.
Okay, so I'll commit to stay on the text chat or the chat in the Facebook feed. So if there's more for us to talk about, we can keep the discussion going there on how we do that and how we can facilitate the process for all of us. We'll give you a chance to give a final comment just now, Lusapho and Hleku, before we move on to some IBASA related matters too. So I just wanted to share with us our previous webinar, we covered a topic that led to some discussion around bursaries for access for business advisors that want to attend training, and the ways that it can become more accessible. So let's just launch this poll quickly. Cool. If I can find the place to, looks like I'll have to stop the screen share. That's weird.
You wanna...
No, I can do that from the top.
Yeah, here. At the bottom, yeah.
For a moment,
at the top for you.
I looked at the wrong place. So I'll launch this poll quickly. So to make it more accessible for business advisors to actually continue with their CPD beyond these webinars and into other spaces too. And there's more and more becoming available, by the way, including some formal training programs and qualifications, you know, sort of. So Tshwane University of Technology, I know, is offering something now. And here we've got something specific around what was covered in our last webinar with Chiba, with the CEO of Chiba, around effective support of entrepreneurs and small business owners for yourself to develop yourself and understand through a full module training program, online training program, how you can improve the way that you focus on the areas that you're best qualified with, and that the mode of support that's best suited for yourself. So it's a bit of a self-exploratory process during that course, leading to understanding how you can best serve your clients. So in some instances, we may work with others that are more suitable to deliver a specific service. And it's not only the technical side of things, it's also the way that we show up in the world and the way that we connect with people. So if we understand that better, we can better serve the needs of our clients. And that was kind of the topic of last month. And Chiba offered to extend that through bursary, so that may be available. So if you participate in the poll and you vote there, we can see how the access to that kind of support for you to actually be able to attend such a program would be would become possible too. Okay, so I see there's still some activity, so I'll keep this open for a moment.
Yeah.
And we can again, Hleku, if you can switch on your camera again, then we'll go to gallery view. Speaking and doing, as I said, multitasking. Zoom jumps around on its menus too. So in fact, I can stop that screen share now. And yeah.
So maybe Hleku can share something as closure.
Yeah, so last comments, you know, sort of, so we spent kind of 40 minutes together here talking about the topic. So if you've got a comment to make.
Okay, I think from my side, one more comment I can make is that, look, the relationship that we have with Exxaro has allowed us to dream even bigger. And we started as a small studio doing family shoots, and we grew so much that we now see ourselves in a few years' time as a serious agency competing with the big advertising agencies like your Joe Publics and the Ogilvy's of this world. Along the way, we built our product offerings. We could do video production and live streaming, all because of the assistance that we got from the relationship with Exxaro. So that's my closing comment. That is very important. This very important contribution from the likes of Exxaro and ESD in general allows businesses like ourselves to dream and to realize what's possible.
Awesome, thank you. So it enables you to fulfill your dreams and participate. Thank you, Hleku. Lusapho?
I think from my side is it's how I think there's just, let's acknowledge that this is not a corporate core business. Enterprise and supply development is not a corporate core business. And I don't think any corporate intends to make that part of their core business. And the growing trend is the one that's going towards developing ecosystems where I think corporates are opening up to collaborating with other partners where there's shared values and we can all work towards developing small businesses. So I think that the landscape is changing from one way it was more about compliance, I've complied, that's it, to one that says, actually transformation is integral to my business future and my business success. So I think there is a gradual shift in how corporates are viewing enterprise and supply development. And the whole thing of ecosystem thinking is coming to the fore, where I think there's opportunities for business advisors to really approach these corporates and start building these relations. I think things like your supply development awards and recognition around good practices is changing how enterprise and supply development is being viewed, and I think it's going in the right direction. So the future looks rosy, and also the fact that small enterprises are acknowledged throughout as the backbone of the economy now and going forward. So I think opportunities are there. It's just trying to extract the right relationships and think long-term as you build those relationships. But every corporate is really working on building an ecosystem around its ESD program. No one does this successfully on their own. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Lusapho. Thanks a lot. We've stopped the poll. Thank you. And I think most is at, yes, about 1,000 Rand is at about 17%, and then 2,015. So yes, thank you very much for that. I would like to share with you all one exciting thing for our next webinar. So as you know, IBASA has been doing this for a very long time before COVID. So this is a norm, and it's now just taking it to the next level. And the next webinar topic will be advising your small business clients under distress. Is business rescue an option? So that will be our next topic for the next webinar, which will be in August. So please do keep an eye open to that and register for that so that you can be part of this amazing space and engaging and meeting other people, considering we're all social distancing and working from home and you're not meeting at coffee shops or at events. On that note, I think I'll hand it over to you, Christoph, to share some info.
Yeah, in fact, if Lusapho, I know Lusapho had anticipated load shedding, so Lusapho, I hope it didn't happen with you. I see there your pictures appearing. So if we can pass over to Lusapho Mokwena, who is the acting MD of IBASA, and we also have the fortune of having Tumelo Choteti, the chairperson of IBASA, in the room today. First, to cover some IBASA feedback, and there are lots of people on the webinar today that aren't members, and Lusapho, so maybe you can share some details with us on that too. And then, as I said earlier, we want to spend a moment or two just remembering, you know, sort of JMT as a key member of our community, and pay him some honor too. So let's pass over to, and just finally, thank you, Lusapho and Hleku, for the input on the topic. It's really enriching and lots to think about for us to go into the future too.
Thank you.
So, I'm not sure. I mean,
thank you, Chris.
I'm going over to you, Lusapho.
Yes, thank you so much. I firstly just want to say to my panelists, thank you for being authentic, being honest about what it takes to move SMMEs forward. I believe that a developed ecosystem, especially in South Africa, is the key to getting everybody part of this economic recovery. And it's important to know that business advisors are actually integral in connecting where we need the connections to be made. One of the reasons for development is because we as IBASA have identified that business advisors are key role players, allowing SMMEs and the corporate world to meet each other. So for all of us who've attended, I believe we have definitely learned such valuable information that is going to be a differentiator in these difficult times. Lastly, from my side, I just want to add the importance of keeping the communication or the discussion going. We do have our Facebook platforms. We do have various places where people must continue the discussion. This shouldn't end here. We shouldn't just have one webinar where we discuss its importance and we go on our day without addressing the importance of business advisors. So I hope to encourage everyone, let us keep the debate going. We as South Africans, as the whole world, need to keep the ecosystem going. IBASA is passionate about members. We are a member association. However, our passion is simply to get business advisory recognized for the pivotal role that it plays. If you're interested in being part of the IBASA family, we do have our email address, which is admin@ibasa.org.za. Do drop us a quick email if you've got questions, and we'll certainly respond to you. Do check out our website, that's www.ibasa.org.za. Most importantly for us, it's just to reiterate again, we do have an exciting COVID-19 program whereby entrepreneurs can come on board, where we will facilitate some interventions or assistance, as well as business advisors who want to volunteer their time to assist businesses can also volunteer and come on board. We believe the greater ecosystem working together is the reason we will be able to forge ahead and come out. Just to update everyone, we will be having another webinar tomorrow to benefit IBASA members, as well as those who are interested in joining. I'm going to put it on the chat as well. We'll be engaging with other tools that can be used for business advisors through the Growth Wheel and IBASA. It's an introductory webinar, so we invite all of you to come join us. There are many things happening, and we also know that it's not as easy, but we believe that the ethics and the caliber of the members that we have definitely will be the key difference to assist businesses to move forward in these tough times. So I am excited. I believe the topic that we've shared today is very relevant. If you would like to get the recording, we are streaming live on Facebook, so you can repeat it again. It's definitely accessible to you in that manner. And I have just shared a message of gratitude to Lusapho, which I'll be sharing with other corporate key players, where he's actually shared and said that he's open to have the slide. So I think for us, we'll just negotiate on how that slide can be shared, and definitely give him the credits for the work that he's willing to share with the ecosystem. So from my side, I'm really excited. I hope this webinar is going to change the way you do your research. I hope it's going to change the way you perceive an opportunity in terms of your short as well as medium-term strategy for your SMME clients, or even yourself if you're an entrepreneur looking to participate in ESD programs. So from our side as IBASA, we're excited, and we hope that you feel empowered to go out there and make a difference in South Africa and the world overall. Thank you so much, Chris.